Welcome back to First Take. The Twins, Timberwolves, and Wild all postponed games Monday following the police shooting of 20-year-old Dante Wright, who was killed during a traffic stop in the Minneapolis suburb of Brooklyn Center Sunday night while attempting to arrest Wright on an outstanding warrant. A struggle ensued, and police say an officer intending to fire a stun gun accidentally fired a handgun instead. Wright's death has led to 2 nights of protests with officers in riot gear clashing with demonstrators. Yesterday, the Twins decided to postpone their afternoon game with the Red Sox after consulting with Major League Baseball. Both teams had taken the field to warm up, and the national anthem was played before fans were told the game was off. A few hours later, the Timberwolves and Wild called their games. NBA coaches Doc Rivers and Greg Popovich expressed their frustrations last night.
I just know the frustration is a real thing for everybody and for us. And, you keep hearing this cancel culture stuff, but, we're canceling Black lives. And I think, to me, that's a little, more important, in my opinion. And it just keeps happening. We keep making mistakes on killing Black people.
It just makes you sick to your stomach. It's, how many times does it have to happen? And, as sick to our stomachs as we might feel, that individual's dead. He's dead. And his family is grieving, and his friends are grieving. And we just keep moving on as if nothing's happening.
She's 20 years old, unarmed. And yes, he's dead. Also a father there as well. That game that I mentioned that was postponed will be played tonight. The Nets T-Wolves. That'll be at 3 p.m. Central Time. On that note, we welcome in host, lawyer, commentator, social justice activist, Angela Rye. Angela, thank you so much for being with us this morning. What was your reaction to the actions taken by the Minnesota organizations?
Well, I appreciate their show of respect, but it's just not enough. I know there are many people wondering, even watching the program now, what can we expect for teams to do? And I think it is to meet the players in their pain, right? There are so many people in our communities that continue to be wrecked by this type of trauma. The fact that they're not just players who can shut up and dribble or shut up and pitch, or just shut up, period, and realizing that this is someone that could have been their brother, that could have been their son, that could have been their cousin. It's a reality that is that continues to just be a pervasive problem in this country. We're talking about a shooting, death, that happened right 20 miles from where the Derek Chauvin trial is currently being held. There was all of this shift that was supposed to happen after George Floyd was killed last summer. And here we are, not even in a different state, not even hardly in a different city, with the same kind of issue. The issue that comes from white people seeing Black bodies as inherently violent and dangerous. The same foundation that is rooted in slave patrols is what makes people think they can hunt down Black bodies and shoot to kill. Sure, there's some folks that will believe the officer, who is also the president of the police union, that this was not an intentional act, that she thought she was grabbing her taser, but she was no rookie. She's no rookie on the force. She is no rookie at cover-ups of this type of behavior. She's actually helped other officers get out of accountability for shooting and killing another civilian. This is the type of issue that we're going to have to address at its root. And so when people start talking about defund the police or divesting resources from the police, this is why, because resources shifted in another area, even a different type of force that can handle a traffic stop, could result in a life being saved.
Angela, I appreciate your take. Thank you so much for being on the show and saying what you're saying, because I completely and wholeheartedly agree with you. You know that. And I think about this officer, 26 years on the force, 26 years. But you can't tell the difference between a taser and a gun. Are we really supposed to believe that? I mean, it's somewhat of a rhetorical question because I definitely want to ask you. I know you've heard of that excuse, that rationale before. I'm just wondering how legitimate it is for them to get away with it. I guess that would dissuade a prosecutor from filing murder charges against them, and it could get reduced to manslaughter or something along those lines. That's the only thing that I can imagine. You're the lawyer, you would know better than me, but I'm certainly not buying that excuse, and I don't think anybody in the black community is buying that excuse. Having said all of that, as you see the sports world stand up, take notice, and shine a spotlight on this, not just the players, the athletes themselves, guys like Aaron Hicks for the New York Yankees, who elected not to play yesterday because he played a lot of times in his career in Minnesota, and this just hit him that deeply. Of course, the NBA, the National Hockey League, Major League Baseball, all electing to postpone those games. I'm wondering, when you see something like that transpire, what kind of change do you think ultimately can take place? We can talk about bringing attention to it, but I think these individuals, along with these leagues, in partnership with these leagues, in partnership with people like yourself and others, ultimately have the power, or could conjure up the power and the muscle to change laws and affect legislation. Your thoughts about that?
I think you're spot on. You know, when you consider the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed the House of Representatives last summer, and was just passed again in the House, you have to have, at some point, United States Senate action. There are teams in most of the states that senators come from. They should be having these conversations with the senators. This isn't a matter of a political expediency. It is a matter of life and death for too many people in this country. Stephen, you also know that there are folks who have that same accountability on the local level, on the state level. What types of laws need to be changed so that people can survive? And also, what needs to happen with qualified immunity? So often, police officers are not held responsible. There are no real consequences because there's a thing called qualified immunity. That needs to shift. Before President Biden was elected, he was not for completely reining in or ending qualified immunity. He was only supportive of reining it in. Now we see that even reining it in may not be sufficient. So let's have those conversations. I know there are people who probably play on these teams or own the teams are like, hey, we're not elected officials. This isn't our lane. But once it gets to this point where everybody's lives are impacted, whether it's through the trauma, whether it's because you're related to this person or you think it could be you next or someone in your family, that's when it becomes all of our collective responsibilities. You don't have to have the political experience to say, I know when I see something that is this wrong and it continues to happen all over this country, it's time for a shift. And I think that there are players, there are team owners that because of the amount of money they bring into these states, into these communities, that can absolutely have a make a big impact and make a big difference. And that's the kind of partnership that we need at this point.
Angela, that's where I want to go right now, and then Stephen A., I'll let you jump back in. But besides protesting or prayers or social media posts, and let's put the athletes aside for a second, just the average person, someone like myself, what can we do to take action right now so there's some sort of accountability?
Yeah, I think the first thing that's really easy is calling 202-224-3121. That's the Capitol Hill switchboard operator. You can call and ask to speak to your senators and tell them that it's time to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And you can express all your personal reasons why. Getting to know who your elected officials are in your communities who are supportive of police reform, or in some instances, defunding or divesting resources, reaching out to them and figuring out where there's real partnership. I think the most important thing that people can do is really educate themselves on these issues, not just sitting in your feelings and the frustration and the disappointment. And as you said, in posting something on social media, what are the things that you know you need to understand? And you align yourself with social movements who are working to combat these very issues every single day.
Also wanted to highlight this as well. I mean, Joe Madison, the Black Eagle on Urban View Radio, Sirius XM channel 126. I know you know him well. One of the things that I want to applaud him because he's pushed for this on many, many occasions. When you talk about law enforcement issues as it pertains to black individuals, understand that it's far more pervasive than just, what you see in terms of traffic stops and things of that nature. For example, we've got an Emmett Till anti-lynching bill that was passed by the House. Still has not been passed by the Senate. In the year 2021, we're still waiting for an anti-lynching bill to be completely passed and written in the law. So when I think about things like that, it heightens my level of awareness even more so, Angela. And I asked this of you as well. I remember when I talked about the Black Pack and you came on First Take and you were like, wait a minute, we got that going on right now. When you talk about these athletes partnering in concert with the leagues and using their financial muscle and beyond to affect politicians and politics taking place on Capitol Hill. I want you to take the floor and end this segment by, just like you gave out that number for the operator with the Senate on Capitol Hill. I want you to take a moment and to remind everybody about those PACs that are out there, those political action committees that are fighting every day, people like yourself and others, to create legislative change on Capitol Hill. What can the players and the leagues themselves, who can they join with? What can they do?
Yeah, so there's several. There's the civil rights organization side, from the NAACP to Black Lives Matter Global Network to Black Futures Lab, that do this work every single day. Some of them have political action committee apparatuses, others don't, but they're just as effective. You have the Black PAC, you have Collective PAC. We talked about some of these last time. You have the work that Stacey Abrams is doing in Georgia, and Insay Ufo, and who else? Oh my gosh, Latasha Brown from Black Voters Matter, who's a dear sister friend of mine. We can't continue to divorce issues of police brutality, criminal justice reform, from voting rights and voter suppression issues. This same fight that's happening in Georgia, every time we begin to exercise our power, there's somebody that comes along and tries to take some of those things back. I think the other thing that we really have to do, Stephen A., and I'm sure you know this well, is we have to center our own healing from our own trauma as well. There's a man who wrote this powerful book called My Grandmother's Hands, named Resmaa Menakem, and he's also in the Minnesota area. The fact that he's helped to train the Minnesota Police Department on understanding what he calls white body supremacy, Black trauma, and police trauma, and how they are dealing with the supremacy in their own bodies based on systemic oppression is another big part of this. That's a whole other segment. But the point that I want to raise is that this work is for all of us to do. It's not just for Black athletes to do. It's not just owners who feel sympathetic to people who play on their teams. It is for all of us to do. And we're not going to do this without moving out of the trauma and finally realizing that Black people are not inherently violent and criminal.
Well, I applaud you for doing the work. And I just want one more time, Angela, thank you again for being with us. And we will have you back and have that conversation. Everyone can follow you on social media. I read your bio before, multi-hyphenate. I had to look down because there's so many things that you've accomplished. But Angela Rye is on Twitter, on Instagram. Follow her. She'll continue to lead you in this direction. But please give us that phone number one more time for folks at home who didn't get a chance and don't have their phone or pen and paper out.
It's 202-224-3121, and you're calling the Capitol switchboard operator. You're asking to speak to your senator. Know who that is. Whatever state you come from, you have to. Unless you're in D.C., that's a whole other battle, but you can get involved in D.C. state too. Yeah. And then also calling your members of Congress. What legislation do you want them to pass? That is the question. It is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It's time.
Thank you, Angela.
Angela Rye, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. When we come back here on First Take, I mentioned earlier the NFL draft about 2 weeks away. Who has more to prove? Is it Sam Darnold, who is Dell, or his potential replacement?